Hi, my name is Coleman Newsom, and this is the Dorm Room Report. Today's topic, genetically modified organisms, more commonly referred to as GMOs. 90% of scientists believe GMOs are perfectly safe, yet two-thirds of consumers believe that they aren't. Today we're going to be looking at, more specifically, why people hold on to these misconceptions that they have about GMOs in the face of science. Consumers believe GMOs are dangerous despite contrary evidence because of a lack of understanding behind the science of the process, as well as the scary connotations of the phrase genetically modified. Consumers' fears are coming from a lack of understanding of the science. A recent Pew Research Center study surveyed two different groups as to whether they believed GMOs to be harmful or not. One group were consumers with a low knowledge of GM sciences. The other group was consumers with a high knowledge of GM sciences. In 2016, 26% of the consumers with a low knowledge of GMOs thought that GMOs were harmful. In 2018, that number jumped up to 52%. Now, amongst consumers with a high knowledge of GM sciences, that number jumped from 37% to 38%, only a 1% increase. This shows that with the recent uproar of GM critics, that the majority of them have little knowledge of GM sciences. This lends itself into another reason why consumers fear GMOs, which is a simple fear of the unknown, a tendency for individuals to experience fear when there is a perceived lack of information. UCLA molecular biologist Bob Goldberg stated in a recent interview that there is no difference between manipulating a gene in the traditional way, which is breeding, and manipulating a gene through GM sciences. The only real difference is GM foods will go under 10 to 15 years of testing before they reach the shelves, while breeding methods will go straight from farm to table. The difference in procedure boils down to the fact that they don't understand it, so they fear it, despite the fact that science says there's no difference between the two methods. This fear of the unknown explains why consumers still hold on to their GMO biases. If you're strolling across the internet and you come across an article and it says that GMOs are safe and that science proved it, you still might not give in and change your views because ultimately you don't understand the process, you don't understand the science, so you still hold on to that fear of the unknown. Another reason people are so skeptical of GMOs is the actual rhetoric behind the food. When you hear the phrase genetically modified organisms, it sounds scary. It doesn't sound like it's natural, it doesn't sound like it's organic, which turns consumers off. Also, through social media, GMO critics have begun labeling GMOs with words like Frankenstein foods, which the connotation with that when consumers see it is they start to think that this is a monster, something created in the lab rather than coming from nature. But when you think about it, this is a rather flawed logic. After all, most of our medications, life-saving medications, are made in labs. The connotation of genetically modified food suggests that there's some part of this natural food that was taken and then modified to create an unnatural food. At least that's the conclusion that a lot of consumers are reaching. There's become a difference in grocery markets between organic foods and genetically modified foods, when in reality there isn't any difference. Genetically modified foods are still organic. They're all organic substances, just how they're put together is different. Some consumers believe that scientists are just playing God. After all, GMOs are quite literally new substances that have not appeared in nature in this genetic structure before. Genetically modified organisms have an unfortunate name, and that means that some consumers simply will steer away from it just because it sounds dangerous. You might be thinking, so what? What does it matter? You either eat them or you don't, and if you don't eat them, then you're missing out on something. But actually, even with the increased opposition of recent times against GMOs, we've seen stricter regulations placed on GMOs, making it tougher for some projects to ever even reach the shelves. The fact of the matter is, GMOs have serious economic and nutritional benefits, and it can really help out society. Since GMOs were first introduced, they've contributed about $150 billion to the worldwide market. And if you took the US economy and you removed GMOs, the effect would be about $14 to $26 million change in food prices. There are also serious health benefits to GM crops. One GM crop, for example, golden rice, can provide necessary nutrients to over 250 million kids who are at risk of vitamin A deficiency, one of the greatest killers among children. Yet opposition from companies like Greenpeace have delayed those crops getting to those children, affecting the health of those children. It's a good example of the dangers of these misconceptions and why it's important that people ultimately change their misconceptions. An understanding for why people have these misconceptions is important for changing those misconceptions. It's important to educate people on the actual sciences behind GMOs and the safety of GM foods. And maybe we should even change the name. Well, that's all we got for you today. We'll see you next time on the Dorm Room Report.